Just thought I'd take a little time and try and figure out how to use the new Paragon furnace, because I've got a batch of adzes in there that are all ready to harden and temper if I can get them up to temperature. So while this thing runs and does its thing, which will take about 2 hours, I thought we would make a little axe. Actually, I thought we would make 2 little axes, and I'm going to do one today and one in another video, and then we'll probably harden and temper both axes at the same time. And these axes are both going to be essentially the same axe, but we're going to take a slightly different approach. This first axe that I'd like to do, we're going to start with a piece of 01 tool steel. Now you can start with any kind of hardenable tool steel. Anything from 1045 or better would work. 1085 would be a good choice. W1 would be okay. 5160 would be fine. And even 4140 makes not a half bad axe. I just happen to have a piece of 01 that I like here, that is the size I want to use. And I do mean little axes. This is a piece of 3/4 by 1 inch. It's going to make a very lightweight axe, and it's 4 inches long. Put that on the scale here. It weighs all of 13.9 ounces, and I'm going to write that down, if I can remember where I put my pen. And we'll see how much material we lose. Now, why am I going to start with tool steel? This is not necessarily what I think the easiest way to forge an axe is, but if you're not comfortable forge welding, it's about the only option you've got. The next way we're going to do an axe, the next one will be out of mild steel, and we'll do the exact same thing, except we will split and insert a tool steel edge through forge welding. When we look at axes again, we will look at a completely forge welded axe with a wrapped eye and build up the axe that way. And those are just different ways of making an axe. But I think starting with a tool steel one, all you got to worry about is punching the eye and forging it. It's a little harder work because tool steel doesn't move under the hammer like the mild steel will. But it's completely doable, and for a small shop, somebody that's not used to forge welding, a little axe like this isn't that hard a project. Frequently when you make an axe, you start with a handle, and then you either pull a drift out of your collection of drifts or make a drift to fit the handle. I've got a handful of drifts. I'm going to just go ahead and pick one that I think for this axe is going to be right. And I think this little teardrop one might be the right thing. If it's a little bit too small, I'll go to a bigger teardrop. And this will fit a standard tomahawk handle or a mouse hawk handle that you can buy. And we'll be able to use an interchangeable handle. Pardon the jet noise, we're under the training path for the Air Force this afternoon, it looks like. But the standard tomahawk handles can be real handy if you're going to use it as a throwing axe, but you can also make a handle to fit. And if these don't fit a standard handle, I'm just going to go ahead and make a handle for it, and that might be a 4th video. So here's our starting material. Now this one was previously laid out for a different tool that never got made. I just laid out a handful of these and I made all I needed to make and didn't use all the materials up. So I have a couple of punch marks here, 1/2 inch in from the end, and then the next one is 3/4 from that one. So 1/2 to the first one and 1 1/4 inches to the second one. And they are centered on the bar, and I've got those punch marks in both places, and I'll just use that to visually line up at the anvil where we want to put our eye. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and transfer those over to this other bar of mild steel, so when we get to that axe later, we remember what I said here. Now to punch this eye, I'm going to use an 1/8 inch by 3/4 inch slot punch, so we'll actually punch a slot instead of trying to chisel through. As we punch, I will cool the punch in a can full of water as needed. And then I also have some Quick and Dirty Tool Works punch lube that helps keep the punch from getting stuck as it gets deeper. Although in something this small, I may not need that. If you don't have that, just dipping it in a little oil or sprinkling coal dust down inside the hole helps quite a bit. I have to be able to find my little center punch marks. Like most punching, it pays to be a little timid at first so you can get a good mark and make sure it's really where you want it. You can fix this if it's not. So do that and then get it hot again, and then do the same thing from the other side so you don't lose your mark. And we're going to work from both sides. So I'm going to do the same thing from the other side and make sure I've got a hole I can find. And this gets easier as you go. I'll go straight on. By rotating the axe head 180 degrees every now and then, if your punch is off, if your lineup is off this way or this way, it cancels itself out every time you rotate it. So one time you're pushing a little bit to the left and one time you're pushing a little to the right. And then we're also going to flip top to bottom and work from both sides until we are about through. Getting the eye correct is the most important thing at this stage anyways. There are ways to fix a crooked eye, but if you don't have to, why bother? In the next heat or two, we'll start getting much more aggressive with it. So one is tough stuff to punch. And I'm going to flip it over. Now we're actually starting to see some results here. But as this starts to cool, it gets very hard. It's much less forgiving than mild steel, which is one of the advantages of using mild steel. A bigger axe also doesn't cool off as fast. But that's okay. I think we're getting very close to actually shearing a plug out. Yeah, it looks like it's starting to move down inside there. You can kind of see a little bubble as it starts to push from one side to the other. I'll put a little punch lube on that this time. You know, I felt that bottom out on the anvil. It's a good place for our bolster we made the other day. That punch is glowing just a little bit, so I'm going to let it air cool instead of quenching. So there's our little slug right there. That's all we've punched out. That's all the material lost by punching an eye. I'm done with the punch, so we can just air cool at its leisure now. So there's our eye. It's fairly well centered. So perhaps a hair off on this side, but we've got a way to fix that. So the next thing I want to do is open that up and start drifting it. Now you could drive your punch back into there and start to open it, but I want a fairly sharp front end of this for the teardrop drift, and I don't want to make it any rounder in the front. So I'm going to not do that technique, but it's still a little bit small to get the drift in. So I'm going to just stand it on edge and upset it down a little bit, and that opens that hole up just a little bit, and then hopefully we can get our drift in. And it's just ready to start going in. We'll heat that up again, and to start with I'm going to go ahead and drift over this bolster with the oval hole. This is the one from the leaf spring we talked about, just showing how some of these things are used. Before I get this drift all the way in, I'll have to give it up because it won't go all the way through. We're just going to start the drift down in there. That's about all we want to do right now as it starts to cool off. No reason to make life any harder than it needs to be. And knock the drift back out. The next time I'll come from this back side so I can start stretching it fairly even. Do the exact same thing going from the other side. And that guarantees us we're going to be able to get our drift in. But it isn't just a matter of stretching the material. You got to forge the outsides against the drift and the anvil, or you ultimately end up trying to stretch it to the point that it cracks. And you can get away with stretching to some extent, and under a big hydraulic press or something it works better. But if you're forging by hand, I strongly encourage you to forge the eye with the drift in, to actually draw the eye out until the drift fits the way you want it to. Now we're getting too small for the bolster, or too far in for the bolster plate. I guess the bolster plate is getting too small. So we're just going to go over the hardy hole. I'm going to move it to all four corners, every blow, so that it's being supported differently every time, and that way it doesn't get a chance to go way off. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm only going to insert the drift from one side at this point, and that will have a tapered eye so that a removable handle can drop in from the top. If that's not what you want for your axe, you don't have to do it that way. That's just the eye I envision for this axe. And I may change my mind before we're done. Now I've got one side of the eye that I think looks just a little bit fatter. So when I put the drift in and I come to the anvil, I'm going to turn that side up. There are two reasons for that. The first reason is that the hammer striking the material on top is where most of your work comes from. The rebound of the anvil has a similar effect from the bottom, but it's because some inertia or some energy is lost in the material as you forge with the hammer. That effect from the rebound is less apparent. So more work happens in that thick spot if it's up. The other reason is that the anvil will cool that slightly, and therefore you also get a little bit more work done at the top, which remains hotter. And then we check it, and when I'm sure it's looking even and it's getting pretty close, then we'll start alternating which side is up. The taper isn't much, so make sure you've got the right side up when you do this. That eye is getting very close to what I want. And I'll probably start forging the blade and finish the eye after the blade is forged, because we're bound to screw it up a little bit. Do one more here real quick. There's a gouge in the side of this drift that is leaving an odd mark in the side of the eye, so I'll have to file that out. That's about as far as I can drift that, so that's just where we're going to leave it. So the question then will be, do I drift from the bottom and make a permanent handle, or do I just leave it the way it is? But you might be able to see right there, there's a little rib from the gouge in the side of the drift. Anyways, we're going to turn that around and we're going to forge the blade. Now with the fat side of the eye up, the first thing I want to do is create a little notch in the bottom. That's mostly for looks, but it also helps the blade sweep more downward than more upward. I'm just going to do that at the edge of the anvil. You can do it with a fuller or set hammer or something like that, but the idea is to create more mass out here where the blade needs to be bigger instead of back here. I think it just makes a better looking little axe. I'm also thinning it right through here, right about where I made my little divot from the edge of the anvil. So now we're ready to start spreading the blade. This will be a fair amount of work in this 01, even on a little axe. So I'm going to start with a cross peen right in the middle of the blade and work from both sides. But get some spread going in the center before you start working too close to the edges. It's real easy for this to mushroom over and fold a cold shut on the edges if you get close to the edge to start with. And if you don't want the axe to flare out both directions, correct it often. It gets much harder to correct at the end. Now that that's starting to spread, I've gone back to the face of the hammer just to kind of clean it up and see what I'm doing. There's a lot more to go. It's not going to be a real wide axe. If I can get that to 2.5 inches, I'll be pretty happy. And I'll go back to the peen because I've still got plenty of material here. That is starting to look like a little axe. It's a very thick axe still. I think we can thin it out and make it a little bit better. Make sure it's not twisting. The little problems that develop get harder and harder to fix, so fix them when you see them early. We continue to get better. This is 5 inches long now, and we're almost to 2.5 inches wide. I think we're going to be quite happy with this. At this point, I'm really just refining the shape, making sure there's no twists, and I'm not worried about keeping the top flat anymore. I don't mind it if it flares up a little bit. I just don't like it to flare up a lot. And that's just a personal aesthetic. So that's most of that. I'm going to go back and I'm going to work the eye some more now that our risk of messing it up is considerably smaller. I won't be able to get this over the hardy hole, so I'm going to have to work it out in the air or have some bolster that raises it up, which for this size axe I don't think I have anything. But I'll look and see. Now for larger trade axes or tomahawk style axes, I've got this thing, but it's way too big for this project. So we're just going to do it the way you'd do it if you didn't have anything, which I don't. And that is, we're going to put this in here right at the edge of the anvil. And then I'm going to start to draw some little ears on here just because I think it might look good. I'm going to work both sides, starting from the middle and working down. Now I'm not trying to draw ears on the top, just on the bottom. That cools off quickly with the drift. Remember, we're working tool steel. You got to quit forging fairly early so you don't stress crack it. This is kind of an evolving design. I wasn't real sure what this was going to result in when we started. So the ears are an add-on. Frequently you would do that when you first start to drift the eye. Now I'm going to use the face of the hammer and just clean these up. They aren't going to be very dramatic ears, but they'll be there. With the drift, you can really see the twists. It's a lot easier to straighten. Now I've made an executive decision. I'm going to drift this eye from both sides and put a different type of handle in other than the knockout style. That's just because I think it'll be a more useful axe that way. But I'm going to need a bigger drift at this point, I'm afraid, because that drift just isn't big enough anymore. Either that or I have to quit, and that might be okay too. Because I decided to drift this going both directions, I can now go to a bit more conventional belt axe style drift. And that'll flatten the eye out a little bit, and I think it'll look better. This is kind of a design as you go way of looking at things. So So it just changes the eye shape just a little bit. Well, you can see it better on the bottom. Next I'll do the top the same way. And to do this, we're going to have to work at the edge of the anvil because we still have an eye that I can't really drive down very efficiently over the hardy hole. Well, that's not the most efficient system either, apparently. But that's looking pretty good. I'm going to do just a little bit more on it, see if I can get it cleaned up some more. Maybe try and draw out the ears just a little bit more. Almost done. That'll be a much better eye. Clean up the ears just a little bit. My eye's just a little off, so I'm going to show you how we can fix that. This pole is pushed to this direction a little bit. So to fix that, I want to put the drift back in. Put the side that's over too far right up against the hardy hole, and then drive that eye over just a little bit. Check it and see what you got. That looks better, so I'm happy there. And then the last thing I want to do before we call the eye end finished is drift from the top, because that's where the wedging action for the handle will take place. And since we've gone to a wedged handle, that now becomes quite important. This is why some sort of a bolster made just for doing axes comes in quite handy. And actually, now that I think about it, I have something I could have used, but too late now. So I consider the eye is now completed, or completed as far as forging is going to go. So we can go back into the fire. I want to go ahead and put my touch mark on the blade, and then straighten it one last time, and then we're done. Generally I don't like holding these little punches by hand, but this is all so squirrely. Also, generally I would do this under the treadle hammer. Then I don't have to hold them by hand. Got our touch mark on there. And since this is our last little forging heat, I don't want to obliterate the touch mark. I just want to straighten the blade out. One last check for twists. And then we are going to call it done. Now, in an ideal world, we fully anneal this at this point. We go ahead and put it in the vermiculite. Let it cool overnight. But so we can take a closer look at it, I'm going to go ahead and air cool it or normalize it, and then I'll anneal it later. Here's our little axe all completed, or all rough forged anyways, and it's a pretty clean forging. I'm pretty happy with it. I'll probably try to file this and just clean these lines up just a little bit, and either do that cold, or we could have done it hot, but I think cold will be just fine. And I may clean the ears up a little bit. They aren't very dramatic ears, but an axe this small, they don't need to be. Now I notice that the eye looks a little off center, so I'll either file that or see if I can forge that. And I will probably do that off camera just to get it done. I don't think it's pertinent to this. It's just one of those things that happens, and there's really not any specific advice I can give for fixing it other than just get it hot again and straighten it back out. So we'll see if we need to do that. Now, this axe ended up being .9 ounces. We started with 13.9, so far we have lost 1 full ounce. We're going to lose some more to filing and grinding and cleaning it up in here, and by the time we sharpen it, I'll bet we lose another ounce. So it'll be just under 12 ounces probably, which isn't a bad size for a little camp hatchet. I think we'll be quite happy with it. It is presently 5.5 inches long and 2.5 inches wide. That may shrink some too, because we'll probably do a little filing on the pole back here. So that's pretty much it for today's project. My heat treat oven has been running over there, and unfortunately I messed up the program, so I had to start it over again. But I think I've got it figured out this time, and I think it's going to work. But I'll let you know in the next video. Now, the next time we work on an axe, I may do a few little short videos in between, but the next axe will be out of mild steel the same size. And the whole point is to compare the difference between forging an all-tool steel axe and an all-mild steel axe. Is the extra time involved forging this much more difficult piece of steel, because it is way harder to forge tool steel than it is mild steel, worth it? Or is the time it takes to forge weld in the bit an offset, and it turns out to take exactly the same amount of time either way? We're going to find out, and we'll compare the length of time in the forging. I believe I, up to this point, have included every step that I've done. Some of this cleanup I'll do off camera because it's not going to be anything very interesting. A handful of fiddly little heats, and doesn't really have anything to do with my material choice. But we'll leave all the primary steps in this one too, and we'll compare which video ends up a little bit longer. If you're interested in axe forging, I am currently working on editing a video that was taken at the Rocky Mountain Smiths Conference, 5 or 6 years ago probably, when I demonstrated forging a wrapped eye style of axe. And this will be probably 2 hours of edited video by the time I get it done. And it will be somewhat boring because I'm going to leave in all the stuff that happens while the material is heating, while people are milling in the questions, all that stuff. So it's going to be a long video, but I hope you'll find it interesting, and I'll let you know when I get that done, and then we'll get that posted probably as 4 half-hour video segments. In the meantime, I do hope you found this video interesting. Hope you can give it a thumbs up. Love it if you hit that subscribe button. Stick around, watch a few more videos, but then make time in your day to get out to the shop, make something, challenge your abilities, work on your creativity, but do stay safe and wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next one.